谢谢各位嘉。
Thank you for the excellent speeches in the opening ceremony. So we will move to the Ambassador Roundtable I, and the topic for this roundtable is the China, US, EU, and Global Climate Dialogue for a Sustainable 21st Century. So I'd like to invite the chair for this roundtable, CCG President and the former Counselor to the State Council, Mr. Wang.
Roundtable at the 9th China and Globalization Forum, entitled China, US, EU, and Global Climate Dialogue for a Sustainable 21st Century. To chair this dialogue, let's warmly welcome President of CCG, Dr. Wang Huiyao.
掌声有请。
Welcome.
Thank you, Minister Chen, for your excellent opening remarks. So we are now getting into this very highly expected Ambassador Roundtable, CCG Ambassador Roundtable. We've been having this Ambassador Roundtable for a number of years, and has been actually already many ambassadors in Beijing knows our roundtable. So today we are very fortunate. We had His Excellency Minister Xie Zhenhua, the Special Envoy on Climate Change of China. His Excellency Ambassador Nick Burns from the US Embassy. His Excellency, his Ambassador George Toledo from EU delegation. And of course also we have the former Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Liu Zhenghua. Of course we have many ambassadors at table today who will participate in this dialogue. So again, I would like to welcome all of you to this very important ambassador dialogue. Actually, the topic we're going to discuss today is about global issue of climate change of this crucial moment. So this roundtable, we bring together particularly ambassadors from US, EU, and China, and also represented from China. The three countries, the three largest economy in the world actually, account for more than 60% of global GDP and over 50% of global greenhouse gas emission in 2022. So we have to, the three largest economies have to work together to put efforts, no matter in renewable energy or in clean technology. So if the US, China, and the EU can work together in the field of climate change, they can make great contribution to our objective in fighting climate change. So I think that China, United States, and Europe can work together on climate change, including investment financing and also development initiative. So by working together, they can ensure that all countries have access to resources and technology, and also needed to address this global challenge. So collaboration in this area can also create new opportunities for economic growth and job creation, as well as enhance the global community's ability to respond to the impacts of the climate change, which is urgently needed to be addressed. So this is really a great occasion, and I would like to really start with Minister Xie Zhenhua. Minister Xie Zhenhua actually has a long career in the climate change, cooperation leadership in China. He has been actually since 1990, he was the Vice Administrator of National Environment Protection Agency, and of course also become the Administrator 1993. He was the Minister of the State Environment Protection Administration, and also he was, of course, Chinese government special representative on climate change. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Minister Xie Zhenhua to give your excellent views to share with our Ambassador Roundtable. Minister Xie, 请谢部长。
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang. and Excellency Honorary Chair Chen Leming, and Excellency Nicholas Burns and Jorge Toledo, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm very happy to attend today's Ambassador Roundtable, and I'm here to describe some events and some status and conditions of China's positions and also the current cooperation between China and other countries. So right now, less than 100 days away from the COP28 in Dubai, the major missions for this COP is to promote the achievements and the success of COP28. And to this, as per implementing the requirements of President Xi Jinping, we conducted a very intensive cooperation and consultations dialogue with the different stakeholders in EU and US to find out the solutions to some divergences. And this July, US Climate Special Envoy John Kerry visited China. Premier Li Qiang, Vice President Han Zheng, and Minister Wang Yi received the visit from Kerry. And I, together with Kerry, spent 3 days conducting 30 hours of consultation, and Nicholas Burns, Your Excellency, also attend this event. And regarding the science, nature, the actions of climate change, respectively, in the respective countries, and pragmatic cooperations bilaterally and multilateral progresses, China and US conducted in-depth communications and exchanges. And we made commitments that we are going to keep communications and to reach consensus between the state leaders of both countries and to contribute to the solutions to the success of the Dubai COP meeting. And in recent 2 months, I, together with Special Envoy Kerry, would conduct one video conference per 2 weeks discussing on the major issues regarding how to promote the Climate Action Task Force, as well as the corporations to push forward the 2020's work for climate change. And actually, I propose to Mr. Kerry, if required and necessary, we can have in a third party, or even I myself would be willing to visit the United States to have face-to-face discussion with Mr. Kerry so that we can achieve positive results and contribute to the well-being of both countries and the people of the world. And in this July, Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang, Vice Chairman Franz Timmermans have attended the China-EU high-level dialogue on environment and climate. And this is actually the first offline meeting after the dialogue mechanism initiated, and both has issued the joint newsletter deciding to continue implementing the leaders' consensus between both sides and to intensify the communication dialogue and join hands to achieve the achievements and the success of COP28 in Dubai. And we have acknowledged the realms of cooperation regarding circular economy, biodiversity, chemicals management, plastics pollutions, and the state carbon market development, climate adaptations, and the main thing, discharge control and the clean energy transition. Preparing for the high-level dialogue, I, together with the Vice Chairman Franz Timmermans, conducting the dialogues respectively, and it was a very successful dialogue, but he came back to his motherland and joined the election, and I hope that his successor can keep this dialogue, as always, contributing to the success of Dubai COP28. Apart from that, we, together with UAE, which is the presidency state, and other stakeholders, international organizations, institutions, and also Chairman Sultan and Executive Secretary General, we conducted a dialogue with all of them. And Chairman Sultan repeatedly told me that this year is the year of negotiations. We faced with a lot of challenges. And recently, I also conducted exchange with Chairman Sultan, and we committed to support the success of Dubai conference. So everyone is sparing attention to the relevant key issues in COP28 as follows. The first one is emission reduction and energy transition. So climate actions, first of all, has to prioritize the energy transition. We have to respect the different national conditions, and we have to make some foundations before disruptions to guarantee fair transition. First of all, we have to make a global renewable energy development goals which can be acceptable by all, considering the different national conditions. And we have to combine the quantitative and qualitative conditions and methods together. And also in the climate ministerial meetings, we proposed some solutions as well. And we hope that this conference not only talk about the goals, but also to talk about whether these goals can be reached or what kind of conditions need to be fully exerted. Second, considering the intermittence of renewable energies in terms of the large-scale energy storage, power transmission, and smart grid and microgrid, which are yet to be sophisticated technically, we also need to role being still played by the fossil fuel as the basis and as the support, so as to support the stability of the grid power operation and the security of the energy supply and economic society development. And during this transition process, every country would encounter this stage of stringency. Faced with these imperatives, we have to understand each other, and we have to communicate and also coordinate with each other to tackle these problems. And thirdly, phase out all of the fossil fuels energies are not realistic. Therefore, Glasgow meetings decided to phase down the facilities installed with emission reduction equipment, so we can develop CCUS technology to tackle the emissions from the fossil fuel energy utilization. So the large-scale storage could also tackle part of the problem as a technology tool. And last, I hope that the Dubai conference would not only talk about the emission reduction for the emission reduction, or would not talk about the empty promises, but to consider the balances between the development, security, and carbon reduction, and based on the best practices and communications and the challenges that we have to tackle to talk about how to cooperate with each other and to tackle the challenges which are faced during the process of handling the technologies, trade, and industrial chain. Second, adaptation, loss, and damage. First of all, we support the goals reached on the Dubai conference about the global adaptation.
We need to make sure that there is a balance between mitigation and adaptation. At present, mitigation has penetrated into fields such as energy, industry, transportation, and carbon sinks, etc. Discussions on adaptation should make reference to, we should refer to mitigation, and we should not stick to technical details, but rather discuss specific fields such as warning, forecasting, disaster prevention, mitigation, resilient cities, farmland, etc. The things that are close to the heart of every country. And secondly, the World Meteorological Organization has proposed that by investing $1 billion, we can help all vulnerable developing countries to set up an early warning and forecasting system, which not only solves the problem of adaptation, but also effectively prevents loss and damage. We can also support the early warning initiative proposed by Secretary General of the United Nations as an important early harvest. It's a small amount of money with a huge effect. And finally, the Dubai conference should make follow-up arrangements for the implementation of the commitment to double the funding with a clear timetable and roadmap, so that developing countries can be hopeful. And third, financial, technological, and capacity building support is necessary. First of all, The annual funding target of $100 billion pledged by developed countries at the Copenhagen conference in 2009 must be met this year. This is a matter of mutual trust between the North and the South. OECD report assesses the figure for 2021 to be $83.3 billion, which is still 17 billion short of the target. Developed countries do not agree with this figure. Ambassador Kerry and Vice President Timmermans, along many colleagues, assured me that this goal will be realized. I mean, though it is 14 years late, it's better than nothing. And secondly, the discussion on the flow of funds must not deviate from the original intention of developed countries to fulfill their funding obligations to help developing countries. A comprehensive assessment by international agencies shows that by 2030, the cumulative financial needs for realizing the autonomous contributions will reach 5.8 to 5.9 trillion US. A total of about $100 trillion US will be needed to reach the goals of this agreement, and at least 4 to 6 trillion US will be needed annually for the transformation to a low carbon economy. The $100 billion may be a drop in the bucket, but it's a small amount of money with a huge leverage effect. Only when public funds are in place can we send a positive policy signals and convey a stable signal to the market and mobilize funding from multilateral development banks, international financial institutions, the private sector and social funds to the areas of global green, low carbon and climate resilient development. And thirdly, the key to mitigation effects and transformation lies in technology. According to the report of the International IEA, half of the technologies needed to achieve net zero emissions have not yet been commercialized. Or the Dubai conference should make further arrangements on how to implement the vision of technological cooperation in Article 10 of the agreement, to make further arrangements to reach the goals. Fourthly, insufficient capacity is the biggest obstacle in meeting the goals. So we need to implement the Article 11 of the Paris Agreement on information, reporting and cooperation for capacity building. And we need a work plan for enhancing the capacity of developing countries. And fourth, the global stocktaking under the Paris Agreement and the strengthening of international cooperation is necessary. First, the stocktaking should convey a positive energy. Comprehensive assessment should be taken into consideration. If the Paris Agreement is not reached or not fully implemented, and if parties do not take actions, the global temperature rise may reach 3.5 degrees Celsius or even higher. We should make every effort to avoid such a scenario. If the actions taken by countries under the Paris Agreement taken together, with these, the global temperature rise may be contained to about 2.6 to 2.8 degrees, which indicates that there is progress under the Paris Agreement. We need to appreciate this positive agreement, but we still need to work harder. If all the targets committed to under the Paris Agreement have been met, we should be able to contain the temperature rise to under 1.7 degrees. That means that if all the NDCs are met, so we will be able to reach the goal of temperature rise less than 2 degrees in. So this requires all parties to first of all meet their commitment, and then strive to do better. And secondly, the stocktaking should be anchored in international cooperation. Progress in all aspects of mitigation, adaptation, and support should be assessed in a fair and comprehensive manner. Closing the gap ultimately depends on strengthening international cooperation so as to accelerate transform and innovation. The results of the stocktaking should be centered on proposing practical solutions to the barriers affecting global climate action and cooperation. And this will be crucial to starting a new journey of the Paris Agreement in the critical decade, so as to prepare for a submission of new NDCs by all parties in 2025. We stand ready to work with the United States and Europe to help other developing countries to develop renewable energy, increase climate resilience, and enhance capacity. In addition, all parties should create a favorable diplomatic environment for international cooperation, build an open economic and trading system, adhere to multilateralism and globalization, and oppose trade protectionism and unilateral measures. Studies show that if trade protectionism continues, PV module prices are expected to be 20 to 25% higher in 2030 than in the globalization scenario. So this would be very detrimental to realizing this year's G20 summit's goal of striving for global renewable energy in 2030 to be 3 times that of 2020. We hope that countries concerned will refrain from politicizing technical cooperation in the new energy industry, stick to fair, open and non-discriminatory trade policies, treat domestic and foreign enterprises and products equally, and eliminate trade barriers for better global and domestic renewable energy deployment. We hope that countries will not resort to unilateral measures such as carbon border adjustment mechanisms. And we hope that all parties would work together to address issues of environmental integrity, carbon leakage under the multilateral mechanism for carbon pricing in the carbon market under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So given time constraints, I'll share these thoughts first, and I look forward to discussing these more in depth with you. Next week, I'll be co-hosting with my colleague, a French colleague, the Friends of the Paris Agreement High-Level Dialogue in Beijing, where I will invite old friends and new who have contributed to the achievement of the Paris Agreement to discuss how we could contribute to the success of the Dubai Conference. Chair of the Dubai Conference, Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC will participate, and the Secretary General of the representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations will be participating, and I will bring the results of this meeting to our meeting next week. I hope that we can bring the wisdom of all parties together to promote the successful Dubai Conference and continue to tackle climate change for the sake of all humankind, for the sake of our future generations, and for the Earth. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Special Envoy Ambassador Xie Zhenhua. I was impressed by what you said. You have been dedicated to climate change, dealing with climate change for more than many years, and you have made huge contributions in this regard, and in some areas you have been leading global discussion. Recently you've kept close contact with European and American colleagues. There have been many visits from the US, senior officials of the United States, and you expressed your wish to go to US and the EU for further discussions. We appreciate that. And also you mentioned we should step up cooperation with developing countries. And we need a friendly diplomatic environment for the progress. So I think that's very important that we safeguard multilateralism. Once again, thank you very much for sharing with us your insights and the latest development. We were very happy to be updated.
Right, our next opening key remark from His Excellency Nicholas Burns, Ambassador of the United States to People's Republic of China. I know Ambassador Burns for many years, and since he was at Harvard. He was actually a Harvard professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where he was a Goldman Professor of Practice of Diplomacy since until 2021, when he was appointed Ambassador of China. But of course, before that, he was also served as a member of the Foreign Policy Advisory Board of the Secretary of State John Kerry. And of course, before that, he was ambassador to NATO. And also before that, I know he has undertaken the Undersecretary of the State Department. So have many years of experience. And also, we would really like to hear, the U.S. perspective on the climate change, where I think we have heard a lot from China, but we would like to hear from you. So, Your Excellency, Nick, your turn, please.
谢谢，大家好，我是博恩斯，美国大学来北京。And I'm a struggling student of Mandarin, Mr. President, so please excuse my grammatical mistakes. But it's a pleasure to be here this morning with so many colleagues. Thank you, President Wang, for making this possible. My thanks to Minister Chen and the Center for China and Globalization for this opportunity to speak with all of you. It's a great pleasure to be here with Special Envoy Xia. He is someone who has dedicated his entire life to the environment and to climate change. We have great respect for him. It's a great pleasure to be with my great friend, Ambassador Jorge Toledo, Ambassador Liu, to our UN resident coordinator, Mr. Chatterjee, and we have the ambassadors from the United Arab Emirates, from Spain, from Slovenia, from Indonesia, and many of our fellow ambassadors from European countries and allied countries are here this morning. It's a very good turnout, so I welcome them all. We're here today because there's no greater challenge for China, for the United States, for the world, than the challenge of climate change. And we've seen the impact just this past summer. Unprecedented heat waves, wildfires, flooding, droughts across the globe, all of them linked, we believe, to the climate crisis. In fact, 2023 was the hottest summer on record. The 3-month period from June through August surpassing previous records by a quite substantial margin. Last 2 weeks, we saw an unusually strong Mediterranean storm cause an extraordinary, a catastrophic human tragedy in Libya, where thousands of people have died. And unfortunately for all of us, predictions for the future are even more serious than what we've seen. The United States, China, the European Union, all countries, we're vulnerable to these changes, we're victims of the changes, but we're also authors of our present world and therefore have to take responsibility together for the climate crisis. We know the data. We know the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change findings highlight that to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need rapid, deep, and in most cases immediate reductions in greenhouse gases, and we need them in this decade. My friend, the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, our former Secretary of State John Kerry, pointed out in Nairobi at the Africa Climate Summit just earlier this month that it is our hope that our two countries, the United States and China, as the two largest economies in the world and the two largest carbon emitters, can now come together and recognize climate change for what it is. It's an existential threat to all of us. At the United Nations General Assembly just 2 days ago in New York City, my president, President Joe Biden, said that the United States stands ready to work together with China on issues where progress hinge on our common efforts, and nowhere, President Biden said, is that more critical than the accelerating climate crisis. So our two countries need to come together. We have come together successfully in the past, and we believe that we can do so again. We did so in the U.S.-China Joint Glasgow Declaration on Enhancing Climate Action that was achieved in November 2021. We agreed that our two countries would commit to pursue efforts to hold the global average temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Last November, when President Biden and President Xi Jinping met in Bali, in Indonesia, they underscored that our two countries must work together to address all the important transnational challenges, but most notably climate change. And they said at that meeting that they were going to empower the key senior officials not just to maintain communication, but to deepen our constructive efforts. And in that vein, as Minister Xi said, Secretary Kerry was here in Beijing in the middle part of July. He and Minister Xi, I think, had very good, constructive meetings. They were marathon meetings, as Minister Xi has said, over 30 hours of them. And during that visit, our two countries committed again that we need to continue our efforts on a productive basis to reach the goals that we've set for each other. This has been an unusual 4 months in the U.S.-China relationship, and I must say, as the American ambassador here, I've been very pleased that Secretary Blinken visited here and met with President Xi Jinping, as well as his counterparts in June. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen was here in July. Secretary Kerry was here in mid-July for those very important conversations. Secretary Gina Raimondo was here at the end of August to meet with Premier Li Qiang and Commerce Minister Wang Wentao and Vice Premier He Feng. And just this past weekend, I was very pleased to join our National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan for 2 days of conversations in Malta with Foreign Minister and Director Wang Yi. So you can see that our two countries are making a great effort together to communicate, to deepen our channels, our senior level channels, to try to stabilize, and I think we're making progress on that, a very important relationship for both of our countries and for the world. And at the center of the climate work between us are two individuals, Minister Xi, Special Envoy Xi, and John Kerry. I can tell you that they're actively engaged with each other. They have met in person or virtually or on the phone more than 50 times, 50, and I have great anticipation that they'll be very active working together in the next month or two. In New York this week, Secretary Kerry also met with Vice President Heng Zhen. They discussed this issue of climate change. They discussed the imperative of a successful COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. Speaking for the United States, I'm pleased to say that our President Joe Biden has been working very hard to make sure that the United States does what we need to do for our country and to meet our global responsibilities on this issue. The President said this week in New York, this is an existential threat, and it's been an existential threat from the moment that he took office in January of 2021. President Biden has set a 2030 national determined contribution target of reducing America's net greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% from 2005 levels, and we've pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. So we hope that all countries will include these economy-wide targets covering all greenhouse gases in their upcoming nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, as called for by the leaders of the G20 summit earlier this month. In addition, President Biden created the first ever National Climate Task Force in our country with more than 25 senior U.S. government leaders and called for putting the climate crisis at the center of United States foreign policy and national security. I've been involved with American diplomacy for 44 years. since the Jimmy Carter administration. And I can tell you at no point in the last 4 decades has the United States been more committed and done more in our own country to try to live up to our own ambitions and to our responsibilities to every other country. President Biden has led in passing transformative laws in our country, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. They're positioning us to cut our emissions in half in the next 7 years by 2030. The Inflation Reduction Act is actually America's largest ever investment in clean energy and climate action, $369 billion. It's projected to deliver 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. That's 10 times the climate impact than any other single piece of legislation in my country has ever enacted. And this act is actually codified in legislation passed by our Congress with dedicated funding and incentives to our private sector in the form of tax credits. Meanwhile, the United States is deploying an all-out effort to partner with nations around the world to reduce global emissions sufficiently, again, to reach that 1.5 degrees Celsius target. For example, we're working together, and I'm proud to be sitting with my good friend Jorge Toledo. The European Union and the United States have led the Global Methane Pledge, a coalition of 150 countries launched at COP26 and dedicated to cutting methane emissions at least 30% from 2020 levels by 2030. Reducing all greenhouse gases beyond carbon dioxide alone, of course, is essential because non-CO2 greenhouse gases are responsible for half of today's global warming. And so together with Norway, we've co-launched the Green Shipping Challenge at COP27. That seeks to reduce global emissions from the shipping sector, a massive source of greenhouse gases. And we're also working with many of the countries around the table in the International Civil Aviation Organization along similar lines. But the bottom line is this, and the stark fact is that because China is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, it will be impossible for the world to keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius without enhanced ambition from China. Secretary Kerry has recently pointed out International Energy Agency statistics that imply that if China sticks with its current plan and does not peak emissions until 2030, then the entire rest of the world must go to zero by 2040 or even 2035, and that would be an impossible goal for all of us to meet. And I say this very respectfully because all of us are mindful of the extraordinary efforts, and we commend China for this, that China has made in renewables, in solar energy, in wind energy, where it's leading the world. And we hope to do some of that ourselves in increasing our own renewable commitment to renewables. But this does mean that we are asking, we hope that China will follow through and build upon the U.S.-China mutual commitments in the joint Glasgow Declaration to phase down coal consumption, to develop an ambitious national methane action plan, and to address illegal deforestation. China can help lead the world to success by peaking and starting to reduce emissions during this critical decade. The other thing that Secretary Kerry has on his mind, and he's in New York this week, he wrote an op-ed with Fatih Birol, the IAEA executive director, warning that the proliferation of unabated coal, or coal used to produce energy without steps to eliminate emissions, threatens to negate any progress on climate change, such as the recent momentum for the deployment of renewable energy resources. Even if not a single new coal plant were built anywhere in the future, the IEA has said that the emissions from the world's existing coal fleet, if left unchecked, would be the death blow to the goal of limited global warming to the critical threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So addressing the climate crisis is important for all of us. It's important for all of us to meet our responsibilities. But I would suggest it's not just about the United States and China. The world needs and expects every nation to take actions aligned with the 1.5 degree goal. And we are here today, I'm here representing my country today, not to lecture, certainly not to dictate any climate action to any nation, but to hope that we can all work together because the science demands that we work together for a better global future. And we all must do more because time is passing as we think about 2030. I do want to credit the organizers of this conference for bringing us together. I want to credit Minister Xie, the Special Envoy, for the extraordinary efforts he is making on behalf of his country. Thank the countries around the world who are working with the United States and China. We look forward to COP28, to working productively with China, with the EU, and all the other countries represented at this conference. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Burns, and it's very good to hear all your very encouraging speech. And so we actually, you mentioned about in the last several months, we had several U.S. senior officials, Secretary Blinken, Secretary Yellen, John Kerry, Environment, and also Secretary Raimondo, all visit China. But particularly last weekend, you participated in this Malta meeting between Jack Sullivan and, of course, China's top diplomat, WANG. That is very encouraging. But on top of that, we had a special envoy, Minister Xie, had many countless, numerous meetings between his counterpart, John Kerry, in the U.S. and China. So all those are very encouraging news. We hope that, as you said, we're creating a good environment and good cooperation spirit, and China, U.S., and of course EU, and also, you know, many other countries together, we can really fight in this common threat, and which is imminent, and we have to really work together. So this is really a great discussion that we're having around this table for how we can work together, cooperate together, and you know, meeting the challenges of the 21st century. So thank you again. Now I'd like to invite His Excellency Ambassador, you know, George Toledo. I mean, actually, today is his birthday. I mean, happy birthday, Ambassador Toledo, you know. So Ambassador Toledo is also another very senior diplomat. He has actually served as the Spanish Secretary of State for EU and European Affairs. And of course, in Asia, he has been the ambassador of EU in Japan, and before he taking on his Spain, but also European Union into India and Japan before arriving to China. But of course, he's from Spain, and he has, you know, in China, very active. I mean, also leading the European delegation on this initiative with discussion on the climate change. And so we were very pleased to hear from our European EU delegation. Ambassador Toledo, your perspective, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Henry, very good friend of mine and of the EU delegation. I must say it is a bit challenging for me to speak today, not only because it's my birthday, 59th birthday, but because I have to speak after, of course, my good friend Ambassador Burns and my good friend Special Envoy Xie, meaning speaking about climate change after Special Envoy Xie, who is one of the leading authorities in climate change, if not the leading authority in climate change, is very challenging. I'm not going to repeat facts that have been very well described by Ambassador Burns about what's happening and about why it's happening. I have them here, but I'm not going to repeat these facts. I'm going to try and reach some somehow obvious conclusions from these facts. First of all, climate change is getting worse. Every year it is It has been worse this summer than last summer, and I'm afraid it will be worse next summer than this summer, and this is very bad. Second fact, and we have heard from Ambassador Burns what the sixth assessment report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is saying. Second fact is we are not doing enough. We are doing things, but we are not doing enough. It's not close enough with what we have to do. And the bottom line of all this is that climate change is not waiting for us. It's happening under our watch. And why is this happening? Maybe one of the first things we have to address is that although we have a kind of informal governance system or informal governance structure under the Paris Agreement, we need to reinforce this structure. We need to reinforce not only, as Special Envoy Xie emphasized, the implementation and the accountability, but we have to augment our ambition, because with what we agreed and the implementation of it, we are not doing enough. I'm representing the European Union here under the close watch of some of my important member states. And I must say that unfortunately the European Union is one of the three largest emitters of greenhouse gases. Climate change is caused by this. But the European Union, the United States of America, and China are the three largest emitters of greenhouse gases. We know that. I'm not going to name names and the order in which we emit gases. Let me say that per capita emissions, in per capita emissions, the European Union is now already at the global average, which I'm afraid is not the case with China and the US, but we are all struggling to reduce. The European Union will be below the global average per capita emission in 2030, and this is a law in the European Union. In the European Union, we have been reducing our emissions since before the Kyoto Protocol was signed, but with increasing speed since 2005, and I must say with increasing speed with some of the most important and serious challenges to the fight against climate change, which is the Russian aggression to Ukraine, which has caused, as you know, an energy crisis. Well, again, although Mr. Putin wanted us to freeze in Europe, we have not frozen, and not only have we not frozen, but we have increased our ambition to move from fossil fuels to renewable energy. In the European Union, we remained committed to the objectives of the Paris Agreement, and we want to increase, we have increased our ambition. We have agreed that by 2030 we would have reduced our emissions but at least 55% compared to 1990 levels. That will put us leading the global effort. So what can we do apart from strengthening the governance of the fight against climate change? Is to be exemplary in everything, including implementation, but also ambition. One thing we have done in the European Union which is working extremely well, and the example of which we would like to see spread around the world, is something a bit controversial here and somewhere else, which is called carbon pricing. Our experience in carbon pricing shows that it has been the most cost-effective policy to cut greenhouse gas emissions, and robust carbon markets have been implemented. Where they have been implemented, they have delivered emission reductions through behavioral and technological change, and they have accelerated innovation, all of them ambitious targets of the Paris Agreement. It has also raised revenue for the green transition. For instance, as an example of the success of carbon pricing, industries responsible for about 40% of our greenhouse emissions that are subject to carbon pricing have drastically reduced their emissions. We have established a cap, and under this cap, the emissions can be traded. Cap and trade is the name of the game. And since 2005, emissions of the industries covered by the cap and trade have come down already around 35%. This cap, by the way, is decreasing by 4.3% every year. Besides, the EU emission trading system has raised already more than 140 billion euros in revenues. As you know, China is developing a similar system, and we are trying to help and cooperate with China to establish and widen this system. We strongly believe it is the way to go. And let me say one thing about something which is more controversial, which is the carbon adjustment, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM. And let me be very clear. CBAM is a fact. It will come in 2027. It will be effective. We're going to try to start very soon putting it in practice as a trial. But let me be very clear. CBAM is not at all about protectionism. CBAM is only, exclusively about reducing greenhouse emissions. Because there is no way we can do anything useful by having our industries pay a high price for their carbon emissions if they can avoid it going somewhere else where they can avoid this carbon pricing. It is called carbon leakage. So by establishing the CBAM system, we are contributing, and this is the exclusive target of this system, we are contributing to the fight against climate change. So you see, in the EU, although we are among the three blocks here represented, we are the lowest per capita emitter. We are not proud of it because we want to reduce it further. And we are convinced, and we are going to do it, that we need to do more and faster than others. And we will become the world's first net zero continent by 2050. So, as I said before, implementation, and I agree with Special Envoy Xie, is important, is essential, but as we saw, it's not enough. We need more ambition, and we need exemplarity. That's why Vice President Timmermans, a good friend of Special Envoy Xie, insisted in our recent high-level dialogue on environment and climate change that China raises its ambition. We know that when it comes to the deployment of renewables, China will be far ahead their commitments in renewables. We encourage China to say it, because it would set an example, and they have a very good opportunity now in COP28. We also, and Vice President Timmermans also raised his concern to Special Envoy Xie and in the high-level dialogue, we have concerns about China opening recently and having plans to open new coal-fired power plants, because it will have a bad impact over the long term on its decarbonization pathway. I must say in this respect that we were faced with a grave, serious crisis because of the Russian attack on Ukraine. Our supply of natural gas was cut, and one of the options would have been to build more coal-powered plants. We took a deliberate decision not to do that. And I must say that we have not built a single coal power plant in the last 10 years in the European Union. We are closing them down. Methane, as Ambassador Burns said, is a huge challenge. And the US, along with the EU and others, have signed the methane pledge. I would only repeat Ambassador Burns' words by encouraging China to join us, because this is of extraordinary importance. Cooperation. Cooperation with China, cooperation with the US. As you know, we describe our relation with China as one of partnership, competition, and systemic rivalry. Well, the best example of partnership is the fight against climate change. As Premier Li Qiang said when President von der Leyen was here in April, green is the color of our cooperation. So what do we do about the COP that's coming? Indeed, the EU, China, and the US can play a role of deal makers for governance. This is not about creating a G3 that would decide instead of the others. But this is about creating a G3 as an example, as being exemplary, as driving the ambition, as showing that we are the most committed. The EU, the United Arab Emirates presidency has given us already a clear sense of direction and an injection of political momentum with the global stock take, which should become a key milestone for enhancing ambitious climate action in the coming years. It is essential that governments, and the three of us in particular, respond with concrete, ambitious commitments to this challenge. The global stock take needs to be able to inform and shape the next round of nationally determined contributions by 2025. COP28 needs action. It should reflect our call for action and stress that in order to keep the 1.5 goal within reach, we must peak global greenhouse gases emissions before 2025 at the latest, and reduce them at least by 43% by 2030, 60% by 2035, and 84% by 2040 versus 2019 levels. As you have already heard from me, we are going to lead this ambition. But along increased ambition, we need to demonstrate progress in implementing mitigation action. And Special Envoy Xie talked to us about that. We need all parties, and particularly major economies as ours, to implement our nationally determined contribution, but also to strive to include all greenhouse gases and sectors in them. On loss and damage, finally, the EU and its member states are engaging in this process constructively to ensure an outcome that comprises all key elements outlined in the Sharm el-Sheikh decision. In particular, we see the need for recommendation to explicitly target countries and its communities that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, such as least developed countries and small island development states, while also paying attention to building long-term resilience against the adverse effects of climate change. And let me also be very clear. We need everybody, including China, to contribute to mitigation, especially for least developed and developing countries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Also very stimulating remarks. You mentioned about, of course, the climate change is really a great imminent threat for all of us. And you mentioned about G3. I mean, actually, US, EU, and China being the three largest economy in the world, we have facing the climate change, and we could work really together to show the world how this can be contained. So this is really encouraging that we all explore the possibilities and the mechanism to work together. And I think that China, of course, we are now still have the UN meetings going on. And I remember a few years ago, President Xi declared at the UN summit that China will achieve a carbon peak before, before 2030, and also carbon neutral before 2060. So we're all working towards that. And I mean, the dialogue like this is very, very important. So now we have finished our set the scene remark by three representatives of the three largest economies in the world. Now we're getting into the discussing phase of our roundtable, and we still have 6 ambassadors to discuss, and we'll leave a little bit time for Special Envoy Xie and Ambassador Burns and Ambassador Toledo to also to say a few words at the end. So I hope that maybe we'll each have 3 to 5 minute remarks, and so we can start the discussion. First, I would like to invite Vice Minister Liu Zhenmin. He was actually appointed as the Undersecretary General by the Secretary General of Antonio Guterres that in the UN, but before that he served as a Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in China, and also a representative to the international organizations in New York and Geneva, so from China as well. So Ambassador Liu, your turn, please.
Thank you, Dr. Honorable participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank CCG for the kind invitation to me for this 9th China Globalization Forum. And I'm also honored to join this August panel roundtable in discussion on climate change. So returning back to China from United Nations for 13 months, progressively I'm forgotten my English, so I have prepared my remarks intervention today in Chinese. It's very brief, so let me start to share you with something in Chinese. 刚才谢振华主任
Just now, Special Envoy Mr. Xie Zhenhua, Ambassador Burns, Ambassador Toledo made keynote speeches. There's a lot of information contained within, raising many focus points to us. Their speeches laid bare the fact to us that the task is still very harsh ahead of us. I feel this very strongly because I have participated in person for many years in climate change negotiations from COP5. Since COP5, I have participated in these negotiations, including negotiations for the Kyoto Protocol. So when I was Assistant Minister and Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, I participated in 6 COPs together with Special Envoy Xie Zhenhua. including the negotiations for the Paris Agreement. In 2017, after becoming UDG, I have been thinking how we could better combine climate change responses to sustainable development. So leading UNDESA, and my colleagues and I have been we have been exploring how to combine these two aspects. In 2019, we organized the first high-level negotiations. In 2021, we organized the sustainable transport negotiations. In 2022, we organized the Sustainable Maritime Convention. We also organized a few forest forums of the United Nations and conventions on use of water resources. Through these dialogues and forums, we have combined climate change with other aspects such as energy transformation, sustainable transport, sustainable use of the sea, protection of forests, and the sustainable use of water resources. Through these activities, we have been able to raise the awareness that sustainable development is inseparable from a response to climate change. And also, I think all of us should be aware that climate change responses is the responsibility of all governments. It is also the obligations of each and every citizen. So I've been back to Beijing for more than a year, and every day I pay attention to climate change. It's with pain that I've noted that 2023 has been a year with the most extreme weather incidents. 2023 might have been the hottest year in human history. Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned us in September that climate collapse is starting. I agree with him that humans can still prevent the worst from happening, but we need to take imminent actions. So I'd like to share a few thoughts and views on that. So first, we need to speed up implementing the Paris Agreement. More than 148 countries have raised carbon neutrality goals. If we could speed up implementing the NDCs, this will still have positive effects on reaching the goals of Paris Agreement for containing climate temperature rise. I agree with Special Envoy Xie. We need to be confident, and we still need to take actions. We should use active green transformation and low-carbon economic development efforts for further mitigation efforts. And second, we need to pay more attention to adaptation. It can be seen that climate change is irreversible trend. The only thing that we can do by mitigation is to contain the adverse effects and prevent the worst from happening. In fact, in the Framework Convention in 1992, there was design for mitigation and adaptation. Given the adverse effect is unfolding rapidly, we also need to speed up our adaptation actions. I agree with what Mr. Xie said, and COP28 should reach some kind of resolution regarding adaptation. And thirdly, we need to assist the developing countries, especially LDCs and small island developing countries and African countries. Developed countries should fulfill their commitment at the Copenhagen meeting, their commitment of $100 billion every year. we are still short of that goal. Capable developing countries, including China, should continue to provide assistance to developing countries through the South-South cooperation channels. And fourth, we need to pay attention not only to intergovernmental cooperation, but also the important role of markets. Countries should avoid taking actions such as restrictions on exports. So regarding the history, if we review the history of 31 years since the signing of the convention, framework of convention, there have been serious lessons. So to be frank, if we had started technical cooperation and low-carbon developing cooperation since the 1990s, then we would have seen better effects nowadays in our response to climate change. So we need to learn from these lessons and try to avoid disruptions of international cooperation in climate change because of geopolitical differences. Ladies and gentlemen, the effect of our response to climate change bears on the future of humanity. China, US, the EU, the three largest economies in the world, we have different conditions, we are in different stages of development, and therefore we have different historical responsibilities to climate change. But as the three largest economies with a total GDP of more than 60%, we should cooperate together to seek convergence, to continue to strengthen cooperation for more progress in international cooperation on response to climate change. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Liu Zhenming. I agree with you that we should be confident to take concrete actions, that climate change is irreversible, and that we should push the COP28 for more realistic and pragmatic results. Now, as we are on COP28, I'd like to give the floor to His Excellency Hussein bin Ibrahim Al Hamadi, Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to China.
In the minister position at his cabinet for 8 years as a Minister of Education. So we are very happy to have you as a discussant to talk about this theme, because you're going to the country to host the COP28 that very soon. So I'd like to hear from you. And given the time, we'll all be more maybe 3-5 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Your turn, please.
I'll try to be precise. I'd like to thank to all the speakers and all the attendants here today. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's truly an honor to be here today in this Ambassador Round Table. Representing the United Arab Emirates, I would like to share with you some critical update regarding the COP28, which will soon be held in Dubai, Expo City, and discuss the significant role it plays addressing the global climate crisis. We are in the August 2022, we were like 100 days away from the COP28 countdown. And it's going to be the world's largest annual climate summit that will shape a global climate action. COP28 will be the UAE first ever global stock taker, as was mentioned by the ambassador, a comprehensive evaluation of the progress against the goal and the ambition set out in the Paris Agreement at COP21. COP28 is set to welcome over 70,000 representatives, including world leaders, NGO, private sectors, representatives, indigenous people, and young people. To guide our effort, the COP28 presidency has set out 4 key pillars. First of all is the fast-tracking the energy transition. COP28 aims to facilitate an orderly, just, and educate energy transition that empower climate positive development, particularly in the global south. The second is to fixing climate finance. Finance play a pivotal role in enabling effective climate action. The third pillar is focusing on people, life, and livelihood. COP28 is recognized the urgent need of investing in people and nature to address the impact of climate change, and will focus on it, enhance adaptation, build resilience, and support sustainable development, including addressing loss and damage. Last but not least is the underpinning everything with full inclusivity. Inclusivity is the core of COP28. We will collaborate with diverse groups, including youth, indigenous people, and local community, ensuring their contribution are integrated into all aspects of COP28, with a commitment to a safe and harassment-free environment for all delegates. COP28 is not just another conference. It is a crucial moment to unite, act, and deliver to shape our shared future. In 2023, the UAE has declared the Year of Sustainability, today for tomorrow, showcasing UAE deep-rooted value of sustainability and emphasizing responsible consumption, conservation, and joint effort against climate change and other pressing issues related to sustainability. This nationwide initiative calls for everyone action today, aiming for a greener tomorrow, and underscore the importance of collective action. In addition, efforts are being made to bridge the generational gap between youth and seniors, citizens, through a series of intergenerational dialogue during COP28 on key climate issues. The goal is to empower youth in the UAE and beyond by providing them a platform to voice their perspective on climate change and action. In this regard, the upcoming 18th edition of the Conference of Youth in November, ahead of the COP28, once again recognized the potential of youth to drive positive change in climate action. Moreover, we recognize China has played an indispensable role in building resilience in some of the world's most impoverished countries. As a prominent logistic hub for China Belt and Road Initiative, the UAE understands the importance of international development and infrastructure modernization in mitigating the effect of climate change. Lastly, I would like to highlight an initiative led by the Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi, Ghars al-Imarat. The UAE is planning initiative will see 10 mangrove trees planted for each conference visitor of COP28. This initiative not only supports climate action, but also highlights the importance of preserving our natural ecosystem. In conclusion, COP28 UAE is a unique opportunity for the world to come together, unite, and act. We invite you all to join us in this historical endeavor, and together we can share a greener, healthier, and more resilient world. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. So we hope that COP28 will be a success in UAE coming up. Now, next, I'd like to invite His Excellency Rafael de Klerk, Ambassador of Spain. I mean, we know that Spain is also the rotating chair of European Council for this half of year. So you have many knowledge, and you've been in China since 2018, and of course, you have been also ambassador to Germany and to Ethiopia, and had a lot of experience. So, Ambassador de Klerk, you're pleased.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you very much for the invitation. The fight against climate change is one of Spain's top priorities as President of the European Union Council. For us in Europe, this is not only a necessity, the fight against climate change, but also a huge opportunity if we execute it well. The green transition will allow us to drastically reduce our dependency on energy and raw materials, lower our electricity bill, make our companies more competitive, and create many millions of jobs in this decade alone. The same, of course, applies to China, as it has already shown in the development of renewable energies, and to many other countries. The Spanish presidency will promote a reform of the electricity market aimed at accelerating the deployment of renewable energies, the reduction of electricity prices, and the improvement of the system's stability. We will also work to accelerate the legislative files related to Fit for 55, such as the gas and hydrogen package and the energy efficiency regulations. Furthermore, we will promote measures for the reduction of waste and microplastics, the design of sustainable products, and the generation of green fuels. In 2022, 42% of the electricity consumed in Spain came from renewable sources. We expect to raise it over 50% in 2023 and reach 81% in 2030. Spain is the 8th country in the world in total renewable energy capacity, being among the first in solar, photovoltaic, and wind energy. Our companies are developing solar and wind facilities all over the world, including offshore wind facilities. Here in China, the Spanish presidency will organize 2 events on environmental issues in close cooperation with the European Union delegation and the UN in Beijing. The first will be a seminar on COP28 on October 24th in order to examine the European and Chinese positions on the central issues that will be discussed at the conference and for which we have, of course, invited Special Envoy Xie. Another seminar will deal with the International Drought Resilience Alliance, IDRA. IDRA is an initiative with global scope promoted by Spain and Senegal within the United Nations to fight against drought, in full alignment with the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Drought is a problem that affects many of us, including China, which is herself a member of a group of friends together with the European Union, the US, and many other countries. The event will also try to find common grounds for cooperation on this subject, on which the Chinese experience is very important. I would like to finish by saying that I totally subscribe Ambassador Toledo's remarks about the current positions in the fight against climate change and the need to cooperate with China and, of course, with the US too. This is important not only for the 3 of us, but for the whole world, and very especially for the developing countries. For the developing countries, some of which have their own survival at stake as a result of climate change, the reduction of emissions by the main emitters is an essential interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador de Clercq. Also Spain is a very important country for also fighting climate change in the European Union. So we're also pleased to see Ambassador Floy from Germany is here also. Thank you for coming. And so now I would like to have another representative from EU, Her Excellency Alenka Shahadolink. We know that there's a serious flood in Slovenia this recent summer. We can see the climate change is happening everywhere. It's real. So we would like to hear your perspective, please.
Thank you, Henry. And once again, congratulations on 15 years of the amazing work of CCG. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I would like to start my intervention discussing the first question that was suggested in the discussion paper for this roundtable. The question is, looking back in history, what are fundamental power realities, patterns of interaction, and rules and institutions that can be used to harness collective resources for climate governance today? We actually do not have to look very far back in history to answer the question on harnessing collective resources for climate governance. The Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework, accepted last December, is an excellent example of connecting the implications of climate change with the biodiversity system. As the chair of COP15, China put biodiversity on the agenda and ensured a successful and ambitious meeting together with Canada as a host country. Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework will protect at least 30% of the degraded terrestrial and water ecosystems through a clear timeline and measurable goals. It shows that nature is our best ally in fighting climate change. Major powers, major players were able to find an agreement which gives us an outstanding example for finding common grounds on the climate framework as well. The ties between the climate change and the biodiversity agenda should be strengthened as well, with the goal to promote actions that provide co-benefits for the two agendas. However, while the Kunming-Montreal framework addressed 30% of degraded ecosystems, the urgency of the crisis instructs us to go further. Cities occupied just 3% of the Earth's land, hold 60 to 70% of global population, but account for 60 to 80% of energy consumption. Overall, 70% of all human-induced environment impact is produced in cities. Cities are responsible for addressing the impacts of climate change, inequalities, health risks, demographic changes, for instance. And they actually engage in remarkably effective global networks, yet they remain largely sidelined in the formal mechanisms of global governance, as emphasized in the UN high-level panel on effective multilateralism report. Cities are global hubs of innovation that can produce and need to produce also new solutions to address climate change. The question is how to include cities into the COP28 process. When it comes to mitigation of climate change, we need all parties, in particular major economies, where special responsibility obviously lies with EU, US, and China, to present updated and ambitious NDCs and long-term strategies. However, voluntary commitment will not suffice. We need to reach the agreement on emission phase-out. Scientists are concerned as the climate changes are happening according to their forecasted scenario, but the process is faster and more intensive than they predicted. The EU will continue to ask for the structured phasing out of fossil fuels as well as fossil fuel subsidies. We know it will be a challenge given the experience from the last COP. This topic should be addressed together and not to be distracted by a possible target for investment into renewables and energy sufficiency. Slovenia and EU is very supportive of these targets, but it is clear that this can only come hand in hand with the structured phasing out of fossil fuels. Globally, it is clear that the greenhouse emissions continue to rise. Investment in renewables is actually offsetting the new developments, but is not yet capping the rise in temperature. Only a phase out together with a major investment in renewables that is already happening could help the climate. An important emphasis, I think it's also that the eyes of the world are on COP28. In particular, the eyes of youth, which is getting, rightly so, impatient, anxious, and frustrated. Especially in the face of extreme weather events happening across the globe, the public perception of the COP process is, to say the last, wary. Allow me also to introduce a bit the Slovenia stance. Climate security is one of the Slovenian priorities during our UN Security Council mandate in 2024-2025. Our position is that while it is important to respect different UN bodies' responsibilities and mandates, however, the question of climate is so important that can be or has to be put also onto the UN Security Council agenda. The climate crisis is a survival crisis, and as such, a major and global security questions. Slovenia will pay special attention to water and water management questions in close partnership with all UN members and in particular with all the UN Security Council members. Slovenia will continue to advocate the right to clean, healthy and sustainable environment. We were one of the 5 core countries that proposed and work on that new human rights for the last 10 years, and we are really pleased that the General Assembly adopted the resolution last year. However, the resolution, as it goes always, needs the implementation. Slovenia is also a founding member of the Green Group, addressing the climate crisis through the lenses of smaller states. Green Group was launched in 2009. In 2009, when the climate question, climate change was not so much at the front of the global agenda, and the Green Group that consists of Cabo Verde, Costa Rica, Iceland, Singapore, Slovenia and United Arab Emirates looks at the global problems, looks at the problems of climate change through the lenses of smaller states. My country is also part of the group of Friends on Climate Security, developing cooperative solutions on or the impact of climate change on security policy. And allow me to conclude with the following. Since this year is the 10th anniversary of Belt and Road Initiative, and the EU Commission has announced the scaling up of the Global Gateway to narrow the investment gap worldwide. It is probably also the right time to start to think about nature as infrastructure and invest in it properly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Your Excellency. I particularly like the idea that you talk about this is the 10th anniversary of Belt and Road, and we could really promote Belt and Road, and in collaboration with B3W and of course EU Global Gateway, that we focus more on the infrastructure, on the green infrastructure. So this is really excellent point. Now we're running out of time, but we still want to hear Ambassador Dijahari Otomangon, Ambassador from Indonesia to China, and we remember G20 was in Indonesia last year, and we had an excellent G20. So also climate is a big subject. Ambassador from Indonesia, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in these discussions or roundtable. Thank you very much as well for Minister Chen Deming, Minister Xi Shenhua, Ambassador Nicholas, Ambassador Jorge, my dear friend, Ambassador Liu Xianmin as well for setting up the tone. I would be very brief. 3 or 4 points. Number one, I love the words coming from Ambassador Nicholas and Jorge about the come and work together, because this is the thing that we need to do urgently. And the second word coming from, I think, Minister Xi, is the speed up the implementation of the commitments. Much has been said, much has been negotiation, a pile of documents has been produced for the last 20 years. So this is the time for the implementations. So let me start by saying that for Indonesia, climate change does not only affect our ecosystem, but it also has the potential to become a threat to our economy in many areas such as marine and coastal, water, agriculture, and health. For Indonesia, the climate change could cause economic losses as much as 1 to 3.45% of our national GDP by 2030, and 2030 only 7 years from now, not that long. So in order to prevent this, Indonesia already set up the new nationally determined contribution, NDC we call it. We aim to reduce greenhouse gas emission by almost 32% with our own efforts and 44% with the international help by 2030, so 7 years from now. So therefore, in order to sustain this energy transition plan, during the presidency of G20 last year in Bali, Indonesia announced the establishment of the Energy Transition Mechanism. We call it ETM. This platform was supported by the Asian Development Bank to achieve the just and affordable energy transition. And this year, Indonesia assumed the chairmanship of ASEAN. We also underlined the importance to implement the decision of the COP27. We urge the developed countries to fulfill their commitment for climate change, in particular the quote-unquote G3, as already mentioned by one of the speakers here, and establish a new collective and quantified goal to mobilize more climate finance for the needs of developing countries. So, as Indonesia is also of the view that having business ecosystem can support as well the transition to green energy is essential. I look, some of the business people are participating at this forum as well. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends ambassador, in closing, from the pandemic of COVID-19 and the multidimensional crisis we are facing today, we learn an important lesson, that to collaborate, to grow, and to prosper together is our only option. No country can be free from climate change problems if others are still struggling behind. To conclude, I will quote what my president said during the G20 last year. We have no other option. Collaboration is badly needed to save the world. We all have responsibility not only for our people, but also for the people of the world. And being responsible here means creating win-win and not zero-sum situation. Terima kasih, thank you, xie.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. As Indonesia is one of the biggest Global South country, of course, you have represented a very strong initiative also that Global South would like to work together on this climate change as well. So this is great that we all have to work together. And now finally, last but not least, we have the UN coordinator in China, His Excellency Chatterjee, and as UN is currently having this meeting going on, so you have a few words at the end to capture the what we've been discussing. So, Sid, please.
Your Excellency Xie, Ambassador Burns, Ambassador Toledo, ambassadors present, my colleagues from the UN family, ladies and gentlemen. To face the challenges of constructing a more sustainable 21st century, the urgent need for global dialogue on climate action between China, the United States, and countries of the European Union is abundantly clear. This roundtable, initiated by the Center for China and Globalization at the 9th China and Globalization Forum, is therefore most welcome. Climate change's repercussions are becoming increasingly obvious. In his recent address to the 78th session of the General Assembly, the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, put it bluntly, and he said, and I quote, "We have just survived the hottest days, the hottest months, the hottest summer on the books. Behind every broken record are broken economies, broken lives, and whole nations at breaking point. Every continent, every region, every country is feeling the heat. But I'm not sure all leaders are feeling that heat. Actions are falling abysmally short. End of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached tipping point. The US, the EU, China, and the world are experiencing the malevolent side of nature, testing the very limits of human survival. From Hawaii to Greece to Xi'an, extreme weather has upended lives and livelihoods. One only needs to look at the inequity and loss caused by the recent unprecedented floods in Libya, where the skies unleashed 100 times of more the monthly rainfall in just 24 hours, resulting in the deaths of thousands of already vulnerable people. As the first movers assembled at today's Climate Ambition Summit in New York, we recognize that sustained cooperation on climate change between China, the US, and the EU is essential due to its size, economies, and significant contributions to global carbon emissions. By fostering continued communications, cooperation, and collaboration amongst them, we have the potential to make further headway in tackling climate change. However, this call for cooperation goes beyond sharing responsibilities. It is recognizing that each of these global powers possess unique expertise, resources, and technological breakthroughs. By maintaining conversations, we can share best practices, information, and innovations to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and net zero. I'd like to make the case that now, more than ever, we need to resurrect and revitalize the spirit of multilateralism with the United Nations at the central pillar. The UN has long served as a forum for such a conversation, global cooperation, and consensus building. In the midst of the climate crisis, it is vital to ensure that every nation has a voice and that is inclusive when decisions are made. Furthermore, facilitating dialogue on climate action may foster trust and collaboration amongst major powers who frequently find themselves at odds in rising geopolitical tensions to instead focus on the common and existentialist threat of climate change. We do see good news, however, and signs of progress from all three parties. In the United States, the landmark Inflation Reduction Act included US $369 billion in climate provisions estimated to reduce its emissions by 40% on 2005 levels by 2030. The European Green Deal, agreed by EU member states, offers similar opportunities for innovation and reduction of its emissions by at least 55% on 1990 levels by 2030. Last year, ladies and gentlemen, China spent $546 billion on clean energy while manufacturing and deploying more renewables than any other part of the world. I recently visited the Kubuchi Desert and have seen firsthand how an entire desert ecosystem has been turned into a place rich with agriculture, livestock, and a people's lives and livelihoods completely transformed. Therefore, here in China, we as the United Nations family continue to encourage the scaling up of best practices, the acceleration of its transition to renewables and carbon neutrality, and its engagement in bilateral and multilateral channels to push forward the global agenda on climate actions. Ladies and gentlemen, but the whole will always be greater than the sum of its parts. That is why the time has come to accelerate and look at issues that can make us overcome the current challenges. If you recall, back during the height of the Cold War, countries, scientists collaborated to come up with a vaccine that ended smallpox throughout the world. It is such kind of collaboration that is even more necessary now, particularly between China, US, and the EU as we approach COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, which will provide us with an opportunity and the world to announce greater ambitions than they have previously planned, as well as larger commitments, increased joint investments in renewable energy, increased academic and scientific exchange, increased policy collaboration, increased work on agriculture and food system, and greater commitments to the global south. Ladies and gentlemen, we need a Paris moment in Dubai. But we must go above and beyond. We must deliver solutions that will meet the ambition with real credibility and means of implementation. Thank you very much. Sheshe.
Thank you, Sid, for your also excellent remarks, and particularly from UN point of view, because we know that UN is also champion this sustainable development, particularly the climate change. We're having UN COP28 coming up, and so your remark has really added great value. 那么现在呢，因为我们今天这个会哈。
Okay, now it's very special because the Ambassadors Roundtable is very critical and very important, so we are kind of behind the schedule. And I'd like to invite the keynote speakers to respond to some of the questions as well as the topics proposed by our ambassadors. And Special Envoy Ambassador Xie, in terms of environment protection and climate change, he is the most influential figure, and he right now is the Special Envoy on climate issues of China and communicating a lot with the VIPs from EU and US. And right now, we are showcasing more aggressive and dynamic momentum from China. So at last, I'd like to invite Special Envoy Ambassador Xie to feedback or respond to some of these proposals and questions from the previous presentation made by these ambassadors. Thank you. Yes, the presentations made by ambassadors enlightened me a lot, and there are some questions raised by ambassadors. I'd like to make some response to these questions. The first one is the current status or the progress of the climate Congress, the climate governance on the COP. And yes, UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, the principles, the structures of the regulations, which are the framework under which we have to implement the missions of Paris Agreement. So you can rest assured that China, EU, and the US, the leaders of three sides, made promises to guarantee the success of this COP28. So with Chairman Timmermans and Kerry, we all agree that on this meeting we have to show the maximized flexibility as well as the maximized progress. As for the challenges, we have to find out the way out, and we have to find the bridge connecting each other. Different countries have different conditions, so the different countries would have different requirements. So it is our hope that we can strike the balance among the different conditions and requirements of different countries and parties, so that will be the nature to reach the goals of multilateralism. And after the global stock take, we can take actions pragmatically. And in the process of taking actions, of course, we'll face a lot of challenges and numerous problems that requires us even more cooperate, even more closer with each other. Right now, we already had proposed some realms of cooperation. China, EU, for example, in 9 fields would conduct a cooperation, among which, in terms of climate change, it involves energy transition, adaptation, methane control, management, and large-scale storage and CCUS and the carbon market. We are going to conduct collaboration with each other. And China and US also have agreed that in terms of the energy transition and the low-carbon smart city development and circular economy and the methane control and management, both sides would set up a task force to conduct cooperation in these fields. And then we're going to guarantee that this COP28 will be a successful one. So after so many rounds of the consultation, and this is the common agreement reached upon by these three parties. And the major purpose is to push forward the global stocktake. The purpose of this is to clarify the progresses and developments and the difficulties of the different countries, honoring their missions and contributions. Only clarifying these problems can we tackle the problems and reach the goal. Yes, we know the goal of the Paris Agreement requires transformation and innovations, but in the process of innovation and transformation, China, EU, and US, and many other countries, when I'm looking around at all of them, normally their primary plans are sharing a lot of commonalities, and they're doing the same thing in many areas, and their aims are very clear. Objectively speaking, they are competing with each other. Yes, we need this competition, but not for the sake of decoupling or de-risking, but the competition in the virtuous environment. And this is also the consensus that we have reached. In this area, we have to build up a virtuous competition environment. And we have identified the scope of cooperation already, and it is our hope that to cope with the climate crisis and taking actions to that end, China and US have to cooperate more closely with each other. And the second is about the strength of cooperation or the strength of global stocktake. Finding out the gap, we have to intensify the efforts. The NDC of different countries, especially the NDCs of the respective signature states, if all of them can be met, then the goals actually could met, and by 2 degrees temperature control. But if not, it would be between 2.5 to 3.7 degree. And yes, 2 is the primary goal above us, and trying to control 1.5 degrees Celsius by making more strenuous and aggressive efforts. And different countries, based on their respective conditions, make their respective efforts. As for China, we have clarified that before 2030, not on the year of 2030, but before 2030, carbon peaking will be reached. And before 2060, carbon neutrality will be reached in China. So the challenges are daunting to China, EU, from carbon peaking to carbon neutrality requiring 65 years, and the US 45 years. But for China, as a developing country, we are still in the developing stage. We have to tackle a lot of development problems, but the goal for us is 30 years, between 2030 and 2060, between the peaking and the neutrality. So transformation or the transition has to be boiled down to energy transition. So renewable energies would be in the first place. And in China, historically, for the first time, the renewables installed capacity surpassed coal. Renewables installed capacity has reached the installed capacity of coal. But of course, in terms of the output of the power, we cannot make them equivalent to that, because we have the problem like the smart grid and microgrid, and but in this regard, US and Europe, they have a lot to offer exactly in this area where we have a lot of gap, and we can sit down and communicate with each other to intensify the efforts on cooperation in this regard on renewable energies. And also, we are going to give hands to those developing countries. If we can scale up the development of the renewable energies, the net zero and carbon neutralization will be something that we can expect on time. And phasing out the coal, as you have alluded to, scientifically speaking, fossil fuels, it is impossible to phase them out once for all, immediately, like overnight. And you must be clear of that. Fossil fuels, actually, RE is accounting for more chunk in terms of the installed capacity versus coal. But as for the security and the stability and the safety of the grid, we have to tackle a lot of technical problems, and then only then can we phase out the coal. But we have to guarantee the stability of the grid. We still need the fossil fuel to fill in and to support. So what can we do about it? CCUS would come in. So when the carbon could be recycled and realized, finally we can come to the end point of neutrality or net zero. So phasing out the coal immediately is unrealistic and not scientific. So Glasgow summit rewrote the lines of phasing out all of the coal facilities into phasing out them step by step, because that would be more reasonable. And China's coal power percentage previously 72% and now is 46%, and this number is going to be decreased further, and that is actually the basic operation that we're doing, and we have to guarantee the overall stability of the energy. Right now we are suffering the Ukraine crisis, and Europe, they resume some of their coal facilities and tackle their security of the energy issues. And according to IEA, from 2021 to 2021, only EU and US realized the reduction of carbon dioxide by 38%. Us is 0.2%. For the rest of the countries are increasing. Why? Because RE played a lot of roles in here, in Europe. So in terms of the strength of the efforts, yes, we have to strengthen our efforts, but still we have to respect our basic conditions. Innovations of the technology is one issue, and another issue is the systematic or mechanism innovations. Talking about the financing or climate financing, yes, I think money is the basis for the trust to build up between each other, so as to honor our promises, like the 100 million USD's promise. And the Secretary General of UN required to double that commitment, and that yet to be realized. And now we have the loss and damage funding, but yet to be realized in concrete manner. So in this regard, we need all the countries to honor their promises. If you cannot honor your promise, how can you build up the trust with other countries? So the promise has to be honored. And the second, the government has something to do, means that the government has to set up a doable long-term goal, and so the society, by looking at this goal, would have the clear direction of the development of themselves in the future, under which, through the market driving forces, I believe that the guidance and leverage and attraction to more private sectors, multilateral banks, and international financial institutions and development banks would follow the suits, because the market is like huge, and with the numerous splendid technologies, and the enterprises are very dynamic. As long as the goals are set forth by the government, which is very clear, I believe the funds will come and flow very naturally. So efforts shall be shared by all. And the last, today we've been talking about a lot of issues, and I will, of course, feedback these issues and questions to the Friends of Paris Agreement next week, because the former ministers and a former negotiator, as well as the executive president of the COP, they are going to meet with me next week on this summit, and I will feedback your ideas to them as well. I believe not only us, the countries around the whole world has to make joint efforts all together to push for this progress. The efforts shared by all will realize the goal shared by all, the Paris Agreement, so we have to be confident. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Xie, for your excellent speech, your summary and your conclusion. Yeah, we've heard a lot of sparkling of ideas between China, EU, and the US to reach a lot of consensus. This is really good climate for cooperation and a very positive direction of cooperation in the future. And that would definitely.
我一起更好的合作。特别你也提到，就是我们的目标不是说到。
For tripartite cooperation, as you mentioned, our goal is to reach carbon peak between 2030 and carbon neutrality before 2060. So we still have a lot of job to do. This is a very good point that you've raised.
Your concluding remarks, and also I have Ambassador Toledo to say a few words before I end this excellent panel discussion.
主席先生，谢谢各位。我知道今天早上非常成果丰硕，我学习到了非常多，从每位讲者都学到很多。谢谢各位大使，特别感谢谢特使。那么我要快地说上3点，就是我学习到的心得。第一点，我们呢作为一个全球社区，并没有在达到2030年目标上做到成绩，我们必须要加强努力，包括我自己的国家在内，都要付出更多的努力，才能达到我们的目标，在2030年避免气候上的灾难。这是为了我们的孩子跟子孙，继承一个更好的地球，这是我们的责任。我们的政府对这深有所感，这是我们的第一点。第二点，美国会做到我们的承诺。拜登总统2天前在联合国演说的时候，把他说得非常的清楚。我们会把3690亿的美元会放在清净能源上面，会做到我们的碳减排的这个目标，在2030年时达到目标。我们美国总统做了一个基础上的承诺，美国会做我们该做的责任，因为。
And as one of the 3 largest carbon emitters. Final point, it's very important that the United States and China work productively together. And I have some confidence that we can do that. At the Bali meeting, of course, the 2 presidents talked about the many issues where we disagree. And then they outlined 5 areas that we should work together. On narcotics, on food security, on agriculture, on global health, and on climate. And I think we've done the most together, I know we have, on climate. The relationship between our special envoy, John Kerry, and the Chinese special envoy with us today, Minister Xia, has been a very productive one, and it's very respectful. We have our disagreements on methane and on coal, for instance. We've talked about them this morning. And we will push each other. But I do think that the United States and China can rise to the occasion here. We have to rise to the occasion here. And I want to thank Special Envoy Xia for his remarks. Thank you, Mr. President, for convening us, and thank this audience this morning.
Thank you, Ambassador Burns, for your great concluding remark. Absolutely, we need to all work together, China, US, and EU, and this is the biggest area that we can all have a common consensus to how to work together. So we have the last, but not the least, Ambassador Toledo from European Union.
Thank you very much, Henry. Extremely interesting session, and congratulations to CCG for organizing it. Very briefly, because we are behind schedule, I will make a point I made briefly in my intervention. It's that here we are, the 3 largest polluters in the world. We have the special responsibility. So we don't want to govern the fight against climate change together. We want to govern it with everybody. But we must give an example together. So let's do a G3 in exemplary conduct. And how can we do that? Apart from implementing our commitments, and I must say the European Union is implementing its commitments, increasing our commitments, and I must say the European Union, in spite of the energy crisis caused by the Russian aggression on Ukraine, has increased its commitment and is leading the world in commitments, but also by increasing our ambitions, enlarging our ambitions to areas where we need, again, global action and where the 3 of us can make a difference. And I'm talking about, yes, phasing out coal production, at least not increasing coal capacity. We have done it in Europe, in fact, a very dire situation in the energy market. Curbing methane, together we can lead the world in curbing methane. increasing climate finance. The three of us are the richest, or the richest three blocs in the world. And we want to lead in the European Union as with the example of establishing a carbon price. This has worked in the European Union. We want it to work everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Toledo, for your also very encouraging and very positive conclusion remarks. I think today we had probably one of the best CCG Ambassador Roundtable. We are actually conducting this roundtable in a spirit of cooperation, collaboration, and of course also we are facing the unprecedented challenge of climate change, which is very bad, very devastating. But we can turn the bad thing into a good thing, is that we can bring us together, to cooperate together. You know, this is really our existence is threatened. The human being has threatened, so we have to work together. So China, US, and EU being the three largest economy, I think the G3 should work with all the world countries to work together to fight climate change. We can set examples, we can really do good things together. So really on behalf of Center for China and Globalization, I would really like to thank Minister Xie Zhenhua, and of course Ambassador Nick Burns, Ambassador Toledo, and all the ambassadors here present this morning, and also our Honorary Chair, Minister Cheng Deming, for giving this all the opening and also this excellent roundtable that they're going to set a new narrative, new direction, new corporate spirit that are going to inject a very positive spirit into our bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral relations also during this UN summit time. So once again, thank you all very much and appreciate. We hope to continue. We will have a 10 minutes break and we'll come back. Thank you.